The welfare minister's attacked for saying some disabled people aren't worth the minimum wage. Lord Freud apologises and says he's profoundly sorry, but Labour say he should go.
Surely someone holding those views can't possibly stay in his government.
Prime Minister defends his government passionately and personally.
And let me tell you, I don't need lectures from anyone about looking after disabled people, so I don't want to hear any more of that.
Also tonight, unemployment falls sharply, but job creation slowing and wages still lag behind inflation.
Another nurse is diagnosed with Ebola in the United States. She too treated the doctor who died in Texas.
Well, this stunt prompted a punch-up and a denial by the Albanian PM's brother.
This is ITV News at 6:30 with Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Lord Freud issued a full and unreserved apology tonight, admitting it was foolish and offensive to suggest some disabled people were not worth the minimum wage. But he's resisting calls to resign as welfare minister, despite a rebuke in Parliament from David Cameron.
Lord Freud's comments were recorded at the Conservative Party conference 2 weeks ago. They were exposed in the Commons by Ed Miliband today. He said it showed the nasty party, as he put it, is back. Labour want Lord Freud sacked. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan has the latest.
Lord Freud was more of a backroom fixer than a politician in the firing line until just before noon today. That's when Labour released a recording of him apparently agreeing with the question about whether, in order to find jobs for some disabled people, they could be paid less than the minimum wage.
There is a group, and I know exactly, they're actually, as you say, they're not worth the full wage. And I'm going to go and think about that in particular.
He'd been speaking at an event 2 weeks ago, but Ed Miliband waited until the return of Prime Minister's questions today to put those comments and more directly to David Cameron.
He didn't just say that disabled people weren't worth the minimum wage. He went further and he said, and I quote, he was looking at, and I quote, whether there's something we can do if someone wants to work for £2 an hour. Mr. Speaker, surely someone holding those views can't possibly stay in his government.
Well, those are not the views of the government. They're not the views of anyone in the government. The minimum wage is paid to everybody, disabled people included. And let me tell you, I don't need lectures from anyone about looking after disabled people, so I don't want to hear any more of that.
And a short time later, Lord Freud issued a statement saying, I would like to offer a full and unreserved apology. I was foolish to accept the premise of the question. To be clear, all disabled people should be paid at least the minimum wage, and I accept it is offensive to suggest anything else. Ciara Lawrence agrees with that. She has a learning disability and works full-time for the charity MENCAP.
It has made me feel very angry because I don't feel he understands and he needs educating. So it made me feel very angry, but I'm just pleased that he's come out and apologised.
Lord Freud is a former journalist and investment banker who also advised the Labour government on welfare. His fulsome apology may mean that for the time being at least, he continues to be the current government's welfare reform minister.
Well, Carl joins us live now from Parliament. Carl, why did Labour sit on this for so long?
Well, I think quite simply to extract maximum political capital by raising it with David Cameron in Prime Minister's questions. You know, this gaffe from Lord Freud may have been a foolish form of words, really. He's apologised for it, but it fits very well into a wider story that Labour are trying to tell about the Conservative Party, which is that they're the nasty party, Ed Miliband used the term today, and they can't be trusted with the vulnerable. And in turn, you can see how angry that makes the Prime Minister, especially when it's about disability, which his family have a lot of experience about. So Lord Freud isn't out of the woods yet. I understand he was due to appear in the Lords tomorrow and will not now be making that appearance.
Carl, thank you.
For the first time in 6 years, the number of people out of work has fallen below 2 million. Through June, July and August, Britain's jobless total fell by 154,000. It now stands at 1.97 million, with the unemployment rate at 6%, its lowest since 2008. Now, it was a bigger fall than most experts had predicted, as our economics editor Richard Edgar reports.
A month ago, Billy Moore was out of work and worried. Employers wanted experience he didn't have, and job interview after job interview had come to nothing. But then, like over 150,000 people in the last 3 months, he found work. His job is at this factory making windows and doors.
Coming here, it's been a big change in my life. It's been huge for me, just knowing that I have got that job, and now if I work hard, I might be able to go places with it.
Billy's good fortune reflects an improvement across the economy. As orders roll in, companies can hire more staff. Billy's employers in High Wycombe have seen business grow by 1/3 this year.
We've seen, as the economy's grown and the green shoots have turned into this fantastic growth that we're seeing, we need to keep up with that. And as a result of that, we've had to recruit extensively over the last 8 months.
Unemployment hit its most recent peak in 2011 and then gently fell until a year ago when the pace picked up, taking economists by surprise. In fact, a record number of jobs were created over that 12-month period. But there's some less encouraging news too. Wages are rising just 0.7%. That's not much more than half the current rate of inflation, so living standards are still being eroded. On a day of largely good news, this was what Labour seized upon.
We've got an economy that is seemingly recovering, and employment is going up, unemployment falling, GDP growth is positive, and yet at the same time people see in their own pay packets and their own living standards that things are getting worse and not better.
Which was met by a familiar rebuttal from the Chancellor.
We have evidence that our long-term economic plan is working, but I'm the first to say there are still too many people without work, and we've got to go on working through our plan so that they get the jobs that they want and that will support our economy.
It's not long before voters get to decide whose economic plan is used. Richard Edgar, ITV News, High Wycombe.
Nicola Sturgeon is to become Scotland's first woman First Minister after being elected unopposed as the new leader of the Scottish National Party. The current Deputy First Minister will have her new role officially announced at the SNP conference next month. It all follows Alex Salmond's announcement that he would be stepping down after defeat in the Scottish referendum.
Now, serious questions are being raised about medical procedures in the US after a second health worker in Texas tested positive for Ebola.
And like the first, she had treated Thomas Duncan, the patient who died from the virus last week. She also caught a flight before reporting symptoms. Robert Moore has the latest from Dallas.
This was the very sight the citizens of Dallas feared waking up to. Overnight decontamination crews at work again. This time responding to the startling news that a second medical worker has tested positive for Ebola. The woman has been identified as Amber Vinson, a 29-year-old nurse. Her apartment, car and immediate surroundings were all sprayed with a powerful disinfectant as a first step. But there is a second kind of virus to be contained as well, namely fear. So officials held a dawn press conference before rumours could spread.
At the hospital, we have a situation involving 77 people. 2 of which have tested positive for Ebola. We are preparing contingencies for more, and that is a very real possibility.
There is hope if we take care and do what is right in these details. It may get worse before it gets better, but it will get better.
The original patient was Thomas Eric Duncan, a Liberian who died here from Ebola 7 days ago. Next, a critical care nurse, Nina Farm, was infected, and now a second nurse. Insiders at the hospital talk of confusion and disarray in the response when Mr. Duncan was first admitted.
There were no adequate masks and face shields to protect the nurses and other healthcare workers. He was not put into an isolation room for several hours.
The questions now remain. Are there other medical professionals who are also infected? And can officials keep this city calm?
So, Robert, as you say, there are fresh concerns, aren't there, among officials where you are?
Well, there certainly are fresh concerns here. Remember, this second nurse was dealing with a dying Ebola patient, and yet in a major breach of known safety protocols on Monday, just before her symptoms developed, she actually flew across the United States from Cleveland back to here in Dallas. And it means that the other 132 passengers on that plane must now be all traced and their health very carefully monitored. It does suggest that there are mounting challenges for the health authorities, mounting by the hour, a fact recognised by President Obama, who today has cancelled a trip to Connecticut and New Jersey and is instead hosting an emergency summit at the White House to deal with the Ebola threat, recognising that coordination needs to be massively improved.
All right, Robert Moore in Dallas, thank you.
Well, here, David Cameron took part in a video conference with President Obama and several other world leaders today to discuss the growing Ebola crisis. Our correspondent Dan Rivers is at the Department of Health live for us this evening. Dan, this all comes just as Britain prepares to send more help to Sierra Leone.
It does, yeah. In fact, as I speak in the Department of Health behind me, about 30 volunteer doctors and nurses are being briefed on the risks that they'll face and the measures they'll need to take by none other than William Pooley, the man who survived Ebola while working as a volunteer nurse in West Africa. He's actually going back to West Africa on Sunday. The staff here are preparing to deploy over the next coming days and weeks. So the UK response is ramping up. Amongst them is Dr. Tim Brooks. Now, he heads the Porton Down Laboratory for Public Health England that's been testing for Ebola samples in this country. He's just got on a plane to West Africa to set up a lab in Sierra Leone. He told us why he's going.
Providing some basic hospital laboratory support, an Ebola diagnostic system that tests for just two things, Ebola and malaria. Malaria because it's treatable and can look like Ebola, and Ebola because that's the one we've got to pick up to separate the people who have Ebola from those who have not.
And in a further sign of UK response ramping up this evening, about 150 medics and logisticians are leaving from Tutu Field Hospital from RAF Brize Norton into Sierra Leone. They are part of a wider UK military involvement and response to this crisis, which experts are saying must now be got under control.
Dan, thank you.
Still to come on the programme this evening, why Britain's Big Smoke could become the first city in the country to make its parks and public spaces smoke-free.
And the drone, the brawl, and why the brother of Albania's Prime Minister has been drawn into the row. Those stories and more after this break.
Hello again, welcome back. The Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police is reopening an inquiry into the death of a child sex abuse victim after an ITV News investigation exposed serious failings in his force. The family of Vicky Burns says she was abused by gangs of older men. She died aged 15 and no one has ever been prosecuted for that abuse. Martin Geisler has more.
Vicky Agolia Byrne died from a drugs overdose in September 2003, 2 years after her cries for help were ignored. She had written a letter to social workers telling them of her abuse by a gang of men.
I'm only 13. I've got the rest of my life ahead of me. I've slept with people older than me. Half of them I don't even know their names.
ITV News has seen an internal police report which shows officers in Greater Manchester Police knew Vicky was a victim of grooming but failed to investigate. The whole case has left her grandmother broken-hearted.
These old men, they were saying that they could touch them and do what they wanted to them because they belonged to them. And if they didn't, they'd do a lot of bad things to them. And I don't think any of them, any social worker believed all this at all. They just pushed it back to the mind as though she was running away all the time, she was a wayward girl.
One man was jailed for supplying drugs to Vicky, but a decade on, her family are still looking for justice. Yesterday, the Chief Constable in Greater Manchester admitted his force had failed in these cases in the past, but he told me Vicky's case could now be reopened.
Obviously, things which happened some time ago do again have complexities, but absolutely we're quite happy to look at that case again.
But others believe his force could do much more, some even calling for Sir Peter Fahey's resignation.
I get the impression that that it's not something he wants to dedicate resources to, and that he's not serious about tackling this sort of crime. And it's for those reasons that I think he needs to step aside and so that we can get a Chief Constable in place in Greater Manchester who's prepared to tackle this issue.
All I want is her to rest in peace, and she can't, not until they acknowledge what was happening in these homes. It's so sad when I hear about all these other young girls, and I just want to hold them myself.
It's too late for Vicky's family, but they're desperate for any measure which could prevent others from the same fate. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Manchester.
Reva Steenkamp's cousin, Kim Martin, described today how her family had been ruined by her death at the sentencing hearing of Oscar Pistorius. The athlete broke down as he listened to the testimony. The court also heard the Steenkamps' financial situation was always strained.
Anna Mal Clooney, the human rights lawyer and new wife of Hollywood star George Clooney, met with the Greek Prime Minister today. It's all part of an ongoing legal dispute over the ancient Elgin marbles, which the Greek government want back from the British Museum.
A proposal to ban smoking at some of London's most iconic landmarks was put in front of its mayor, Boris Johnson, today.
The city's Health Commission says making it illegal at places like Hyde Park and Trafalgar Square could prevent children taking up the habit. Lewis Vaughan-Jones has been looking at the plans.
Smoking in the open air at some of London's landmarks could be coming to an end. A new ban would include Trafalgar Square and London's royal parks. The idea is to promote healthier lifestyles, says the man behind the report.
I'm a cancer surgeon. I've seen the impact of smoking and cancer, and I would like to see our parks to be the beacon of health in London.
The original smoking ban aimed at indoor spaces has been in place for 7 years, so what appetite is there to extend it?
Yeah. Absolutely 100%.
Why?
Because I don't want another heart bypass so that everyone's blowing their smoke over me. Thank you.
You support the ban?
Yes.
If smoking is banned in the public place, and I think it makes the environment a safer place and a much better place, so I'll support it.
I think it's unfair. The air's free. If you want to smoke outside in the air, which is free, then do so. I don't smoke, but I have no.
Strict anti-smoking laws are already in place in New York's Central Park, where lawbreakers are fined £30. In Canada, you're not allowed to smoke within 9 metres of any public building or outdoor activity area. And in Hong Kong, lighting up is illegal in most public places. The fine there is £120. London Mayor Boris Johnson was doing his bit to promote healthy living today, but when he had finished tripping up 7-year-olds, he told me he didn't support a ban.
At the moment, I've got to give you my honest, instinctive answer that I think it is too much on the side of bossiness, too much on the side of nannying.
This ban is just a proposal at the moment, but is likely now to be considered in other parts of the country too. Lewis Vaughan-Jones, ITV News.
And finally, a furious row has erupted over a flag flown from a drone at a football match between Serbia and Albania last night. Well, the game was abandoned after it sparked a mass brawl. And today, the row engulfed both countries' governments. Our sports editor, Steve Scott, is here. Some pretty extraordinary scenes and extraordinary allegations.
Yeah, a game of blame and counter-blame, Mary, that's fast turned an international football match into a full-blown international incident. Let's remind ourselves of what this is all about. Late on in the first half, a drone was seen carrying the provocative flag of Greater Albania hovering above the pitch. One of the Serbian players then went on to grab it, and that's when the violence all started. The game was eventually abandoned. Today, both countries have been blaming each other for what happened. The most extraordinary accusation, though, coming from Serbia's foreign minister, is that the drone was actually being controlled from the VIP seats by the brother of the Albanian Prime Minister. Well, he said, Olsi Rama said, he didn't have anything to do with it. I've never used a drone in my life, he said, only bought my son a toy helicopter. Well, Europeans' football governing body, UEFA, is going to punish both sides, undoubtedly, but the ramifications go way beyond football. This has happened just days before what was a highly sensitive visit of the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, to Serbia, the first such visit for 68 years. So where last night events leave that visit, well, that's yet to be resolved.
Right. Steve, thank you.
Intriguing. Now, on tonight's ITV News at 10, an emotional interview with Bob Geldof about the loss of his daughter Peaches.
He tells Mark Austin how he does accept some responsibility for what happened.
You blame yourself. You're the father who's responsible and clearly failed.
Do you really feel that?
Yeah, of course you do.
Did you know that she was being treated for heroin addiction?
Yes.
And you talked to her about it, clearly?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I knew about it. And we did more than talk about it, yeah.
Bob Geldof there. We'll join Mark and Julie Etchingham later, but from the two of us, or the three of us with Steve. Bye-bye.
Good night.